Some men chase fame, others chase loyalty. And then there was Hussein Fatal, the one who never switched sides. To the world, he was just another outlaw in Tupac's army. But Tupac, he was more than that. A brother, a soldier, a shadow who moved when he moved. If loyalty had a heartbeat, it would sound like Fatal's. Before the chains, before the fame, before death row and diamond watches, Fatal was just Bruce Washington from Montclair, New Jersey. A street kid raised on struggle and rhythm, molded by poverty, and baptized by the gunsmoke of the East Coast. He didn't want to rap. He wanted to survive. But fate, or maybe Pac's faith, had other plans. When the two met behind prison walls, something sparked. It wasn't business. It wasn't music. It was recognition. Two men who saw the same pain in each other's eyes, two outlaws in spirit long before it became a name. From the first verse he spit for Tupac. Fatal wasn't just another rapper. He was the voice of the streets Pac left behind. Raw, loyal, unpredictable. When he said, "I'd die for mine," he meant it. And in the end, he did. This is the story of Hussein Fatal, the outlaw who never sold out, never softened, and never stopped riding for his brother even after death. Before he was known as Hussein Fatal, before the tattoos, the bandanas, before Tupac ever called him his lieutenant, there was just a kid named Bruce Washington, born on April 3rd, 1973, in Montclair, New Jersey. Montclair wasn't some glamorous piece of Jersey. It wasn't New York, but it had the same pulse, crowded streets, corner hustlers, broken dreams, and mothers praying for their sons to make it home at night. Fatal came from that kind of neighborhood where the buildings leaned like tired shoulders and the sirens never stopped echoing. He was one of many children in a house that never slept. His mom tried to hold the family together, working long hours, while his father drifted in and out. There was no peace at home and no future outside it. So Bruce learned what every kid on that block eventually did. If you want to survive, you better be harder than what's chasing you. By the time he hit his teens, the streets had already called his name. He was quick, smart, and reckless, the kind of kid who didn't follow the rules because he never saw them work for anyone who looked like him. He loved hip-hop, the kind that spoke for the broken. He'd memorize Cool G rap, KRS-One, and Rakim, writing rhymes on the backs of school papers. But for Bruce, music wasn't a dream yet. It was a release, a way to say what he couldn't say to his own reflection. Money was short, jobs were few. The hustle was everywhere. So Bruce did what most kids in his situation did. He hustled too. He learned how to move in the dark, how to read people fast, how to make fear work for him. That's what kept him alive. It was around that time he met another kid from the neighborhood, Yafu Fula, better known later as Yaki Gaddafi. Yafu was quieter, smoother, but just as sharp. Together, they were brothers before the word outlaw even existed. They ran the streets together, got into fights together, and dreamed about getting out even if neither of them believed they really would. Then one day, Gaddafi told Bruce something wild, that his god-brother was Tupac Shakur. Bruce laughed, thought he was just another Jersey story. Until he saw the photos on Gaddafi's wall, Pac smiling, young, standing beside Yafe's mom. That was when the disbelief turned into curiosity. Months later, Gaddafi told Fatal he was going upstate to visit Tupac. At Clinton Correctional Facility, he asked Fatal to roll with him. And that one trip changed everything. Inside the prison, Fatal saw Pac up close for the first time. Not the rapper, not the superstar, but a man with a stare that could slice through steel. Pac asked him to spit something. Fatal hesitated, shrugged, then dropped a few lines raw, fast, and mean. Pac smiled, that half grin he always had. "Yeah," he said. "That's outlaw talk right there." From that moment on, Bruce Washington wasn't Bruce anymore. He was Hussein Fatal, the soldier Pac had been looking for. The kind of man who didn't just rhyme about the struggle, but lived it every damn day. When Tupac got out of prison, he didn't forget. He sent word for Fatal and Gaddafi to come to LA. He didn't need yes men, he needed riders. And Fatal was born to ride. From the streets of Montclair to the hallways of death row, he was no longer just a Jersey hustler, he was part of something bigger, something dangerous, something legendary. And for the first time in his life, Fatal found a family that fought for him the same way he fought for survival. That was the beginning of the Outlaws. And for Fatal, it was more than a group, it was redemption written in blood and loyalty. By late 1995, the war drums in hip-hop were getting louder. And right in the middle of it all, fresh out of prison, head shaved, eyes burning, was Tupac Shakur. Behind him stood his soldiers, the Outlaws. And front and center among them, his right hand, his enforcer, Hussein Fatal. When Pac got out, Suge Knight's red carpet wasn't just for business. It was a statement. Death Row Records was now the empire, and Pac was its new king. But every king needs his wolves. Fatal was that wolf, sharp, loyal, unpredictable, always ready to ride. Pac used to call him his lieutenant. He'd say, "Fatal, don't talk much, but when he move, it's real." In Los Angeles, the Outlaws lived like ghosts and gods at the same time. Days blurred into nights, and nights into studio sessions filled with smoke, liquor, and gunmetal energy. They recorded in rooms that felt like war zones, half celebration, half paranoia. But through it all, Fatal stood next to Pac, soaking it in. When All Eyes on Me dropped on the 13th of February 1996, it wasn't just an album, it was a declaration of war. Fatal appeared on 2 tracks that became instant street anthems. All About You, with Snoop, Nate Dogg, and Drew Down, a smooth confession wrapped in swagger. And When We Ride, the raw call to arms that cemented the Outlaws as Pac's chosen army. He wasn't just a guest anymore. He was part of the legend. But it wasn't the studio that defined Fatal. It was loyalty. He wasn't chasing fame, he was protecting family. If Pac needed something done, a meeting handled, a threat silenced, a situation contained, Fatal was already on it before the words were said. That's what made Pac trust him. That's what made him dangerous. When Pac dropped Hit 'Em Up, the most infamous diss track in history, Fatal was right there. He spat fire with that Jersey venom, aiming straight at Bad Boy Records, Mobb Deep, and anyone else standing on the other side of the east-west line. To most rappers, it was just competition. To Fatal, it was war, and Pac was his general. He wasn't trying to be the star. He was the soldier behind the star. And in those death row halls where whispers of betrayal and gunshots mixed with million-dollar deals, that kind of loyalty was rare. Outside the studio, their bond was more like brothers than business. They'd argue, fight, laugh, get high, plan moves. Pac once told him, "If something happens to me, you make sure they know what I stood for." Fatal didn't answer. He just nodded. But Fatal's fire sometimes burned too hot. At the House of Blues concert, he tried sneaking in a gun, said it was for protection. Security caught him, Pac snapped, and sent him home to Jersey. Another time, he crashed Pac's brand new Land Cruiser into a pole. Pac was furious, kicked him out the group for a minute, but that's the thing about family. You fight, you bleed, you forgive. By the summer of '96, they were back tight again, ready for Vegas, ready for the next chapter. But fate had other plans. On September 6, Tupac rolled out to the Mike Tyson fight in Las Vegas. Fatal wasn't there. He had court back in Jersey, a small-time assault case. Nothing serious. He figured he'd fly out after. He never got the chance. The next day, news broke. Tupac Shakur shot multiple times on the Vegas trip. Fatal froze. He didn't cry. He didn't speak. He just sat there, staring at the floor, whispering, "If I was there, he'd still be alive." For the rest of his life, he carried that. Not as guilt, but as a promise left unkept. When the sirens stopped screaming and the camera stopped circling, there was a silence that landed like a physical thing, heavy, flat, unbearable. For Hussein Fatal, it wasn't just the loss of a friend or a boss. It was the collapse of a world he'd built his life around. Tupac had been the axis. Fatal had been a spoke. When the axis shattered, everything spun out. He flew back to New Jersey with a photograph in his pocket and a weight in his chest that didn't belong to any living thing. The outlaws, the crew, the myth, they continued to exist on record and in legend, but the private gravity of those nights in LA was gone. Fatal wandered like a man in a half-life, showing up for sessions, leaving early, sleeping through days, and filling the long hours with things that didn't promise tomorrow. Then, Yaki Gaddafi, the kid from the block, his brother on the road, the one who'd introduced him to Pac, was shot dead just weeks later. Gaddafi's death cut into Fatal with a violence that practical grief couldn't fix. He had dropped Gaddafi off at his girlfriend's house, said his goodbyes, and watched a life snuffed out that had once felt bulletproof. 2 friends down. 2 funerals. A hollow that had no bottom. What followed was the slow, fumbling disintegration people call grief. Fatal sank into drugs and depression, the way some people sink into sleep, not purposeful, but inevitable. He admitted later that he felt suicidal. He told interviewers that the point of rapping had evaporated once the brothers who understood him were gone. Nights dissolved into drinking, days blurred under the weight of regret. He replayed the Vegas phone calls and wondered, with a terrible clarity, how history would read him if he'd been somewhere else that night. Still, music kept knocking at the door. Labels called. Old friends urged him back to the mic. In 1997, after some quiet, Fatal chose to answer, but the industry that had lifted Pac and the Outlaws was changing. Relativity Records offered him a chance. He signed and tried to translate loyalty into a solo path. December 1997 brought a private light in his life. He became a father, and with that fragile responsibility came a decision to attempt a comeback. Line of Fire, his solo debut, arrived in March 1998. It was raw, angry, stitched from the same street talk that had made him an outlaw. But it didn't find the climate it needed. The country was still bleeding from the murders of Pac and Biggie. The East, divided by West war, had made audiences wary, and Relativity itself was teetering. The album sales were modest, and the label's financial troubles stifled the push Fatal needed. He watched the momentum leak away like blood from a wound. He didn't vanish though. He kept recording, hooked up with Rap A Lot, and began work on Death Before Dishonor. The industry's vultures and contracts chewed at him unreleased tracks, reconfigured Outlaws albums that removed his verses, and the business calculus of profit over loyalty. Old arrest warrants and legal baggage resurfaced. A past of street fights and court dates kept shadowing every studio door he stepped through. So Fatal kept doing what he'd always done when the world got too loud. He wrote mixtapes, features, even with artists from newer eras. And indie projects became his oxygen. He tried to turn loyalty into legacy through music, but the grief never left the room it sat in the booth beside him, audible between bars. Each recorded verse was half confession, half testament. He was still here, still carrying the names of dead brothers on his shoulders, still proving that an outlaw could survive the silence, at least for a while. By the early 2000s, the glow of Tupac's mythology had hardened into marble. The world had turned his name into an industry, murals, documentaries, T-shirts, a sacred brand of rebellion. But for Hussein Fatal, that legend wasn't history. It was unfinished business. Every headline about Pac the Prophet or Pac the Martyr reminded him of blood on asphalt, and of how easily truth gets rewritten by the ones who weren't there. America loved to build heroes out of the dead, but it didn't know what to do with the ones left alive. Fatal was one of those ghosts walking among the living. He'd outlasted bullets, prison bars, and betrayal, but inside, he carried the same infection that killed so many black men of his era. Trauma left untreated, turned into anger, then addiction, then silence. When he signed with Rap-A-Lot Records, some thought it was his second resurrection. That label, home to Scarface, Ghetto Boys, and the rawest voices of Southern truth, gave Fatal space to spit his pain without filters. He dropped Death Before Dishonor, a title that sounded less like marketing and more like a final oath. But by the time the album surfaced, Pac was gone, Gaddafi was gone, and death row had imploded under lawsuits and murder charges. The streets had moved on, and yet there was still that voice. Still, that steel under the Jersey slang, that command that came from surviving the impossible. Fatal started traveling again. Houston, Atlanta, Chicago, smaller clubs, smaller checks, but still loyal fans who came up to him crying, saying, "You was Pac's soldier, man. You the last outlaw." He'd smile, dap them up, sign autographs, but in interviews he'd say quietly, Pac wasn't God. He was just a man trying to do right before the world did him wrong. That was Fatal, no myth, no gloss, no Hollywood, just truth. And the truth didn't sell records like fantasy did. As years passed, America's fascination with hip-hop deaths only grew. New York Times ran think pieces about East versus West. VH1 did countdowns. Top 10 most tragic rappers. But they never called Fatal. The cameras wanted martyrs, not survivors. So he built his own lane. He founded Thugtainment, a label meant for the overlooked, the ones who had talent but no machine. He linked back up with Young Noble and EDI. Dropped mixtapes like Perfect Timing, 2011, and filled his verses with history. Not nostalgia, but the bruises of it. He wasn't chasing charts, he was chasing clarity. Outside the booth, he spoke in schools, told young kids in Jersey, "You ain't gotta die to be real. You just gotta live through the pain." For a man the world once saw only as Tupac's shadow, that was a new kind of rebellion survival as defiance. In Europe, especially in France and Germany, Fatal became something of a cult icon. Documentaries about the outlaws framed him as the last true soldier of that era, the one who never cashed out, never sold the story. Hip-hop journalists in London compared his voice to a preacher's growl. They said it sounded like gospel, with gunpowder in it. Meanwhile, in the US, hip-hop was morphing glitter, auto-tune, club beats. Fatal's kind of truth didn't fit radio anymore, but that didn't stop him. He kept recording, self-releasing, mentoring. He said in one interview, almost laughing, "I've been shot at, locked up, lied on, and left behind. But I'm still here. That's my platinum plaque." To America, he was a footnote in a saga they thought they'd finished reading. To the people who'd been there, the soldiers, the families, the streets, Fatal was still the voice that refused to fade, the echo that kept saying we're still out here. He wasn't chasing resurrection anymore. He was busy staying alive. The night was quiet. No cameras, no lights, just highway and wind. July 11th, 2015, Interstate 85, just outside Atlanta. Fatal was in the passenger seat, riding shotgun next to his girlfriend. The radio low, the city lights fading behind them. They'd just left the studio. He was talking about a book he wanted to finish, Journey of an Outlaw. He said he wanted to tell it all this time, no filters, no labels, no lies. At 2:30 a.m., the car swerved. A flash of metal, tires screamed. The impact threw him from the vehicle body against asphalt, sky spinning, glass raining down like tiny stars. When the paramedics arrived, Hussein Fatal Bruce Washington was gone. 38 years old. A survivor who'd finally run out of roads. His girlfriend was charged with DUI and vehicular homicide, but those legal words couldn't measure the silence that followed. The news spread like a slow echo. Jersey, Atlanta, LA. The fans who still played hit him up like it was gospel. The world posted hashtags. The outlaws posted tributes, but inside the noise, there was grief that had no punctuation. His sister, Sarah Washington, said she couldn't even find his royalties. That some of the same brothers who once rode beside him now acted like his name didn't matter. She called them, begged for the truth. One of them said coldly, "He ain't an outlaw no more. He's dead." It was the kind of cruelty Fatal had seen his whole life, loyalty fading once the lights went off. But for the fans, for the ones who remembered, Fatal was still alive every time Hail Mary played. every time a kid in a hoodie recited those bars like prayer. In the years after his death, murals went up in Montclair, a young man with a steady gaze and the words "Outlaw for Life" scrawled beneath. Underground podcasts kept his name moving. Old friends from Jersey said he died sober, focused, ready to rebuild. To them, that meant everything. Because in a world that glorifies the dead, Hussein Fatal wasn't trying to be a ghost. He was trying to be proof that even the broken ones could keep walking. That survival itself was a kind of victory. His legacy isn't fame, it isn't charts, it's endurance. It's the way his story still vibrates in the spaces between beats, a reminder that loyalty has a cost, that every outlaw bleeds before he's remembered. And if you listen close, late at night, somewhere between the echo of Pac's voice and the hum of a passing car, you can still hear Fatal whisper. We never died, we just rode on.